What's up, you jackwagons? I am Speed Fury, and today I'm starting a new My Hero Academia What If. Now, I didn't really plan on doing any What Ifs today, but it is one of my viewers' birthdays, and normally I don't do this, but hey, the guy's the one person who's been really interested in my What If stories, so this is pretty much just a thank you to him. Besides, though, also the What If Deku was a Dimetrodon video. I'm still doing that one, by the way. It just takes a bit. I just like to take breaks between stories. Anyway, this is a new story. Now, let's go ahead and start. Midoriya woke up in a daze. He didn't know where he was. All he knew was that something happened, and he was no longer in UA. He remembered a bright flash, but then after that, nothing. As he got up, he noticed he was not in a building whatsoever. In fact, he didn't even think he was anywhere near a city. He didn't know where he was. As he tried to stand up, he realized that he couldn't keep his balance, and he fell back down. He looked down and realized that he didn't have, well, it's not that he didn't have it, it's that he had more of it. He had 4 legs now. 4 legs that were also scaly and clawed, like a lizard's legs. He tried to look over himself to see what happened to him, but he couldn't really. He couldn't really tell what he was, but he knew that he was surprisingly flexible. His tail was full. He had a tail, and it was full of spikes, and while his claws were scaly, he also could see what looked like flaps of some kind between the legs on his left and the legs on his right. Not really understanding what was going on, he decided to go and look for something to see his reflection in. He wandered around until he came across a small pond. He looked at himself in the mirror. What was gazing back was not Izuku Midoriya, but something else entirely. His head was similar to that of a snake, but the rest of his body was like a mixture of both what looked to be a squirrel and a lizard at the same time. He then began to panic because he didn't know what had happened. He tried to remember what happened. Then he remembered that he died. In fact, most of the people in UA were killed, he thinks. He knows that Class 1A certainly had been killed, and if that was the case, he was no longer, Izuku Midoriya. He began to look around, and he then began to think, what about One For All? Did I lose One For All? I never passed it on. He tried to charge one For All with his body and realized that he still had One For All. But the electricity that usually surged around him wasn't the green it normally was. It was instead of very, very bright blue. Izuku then began to walk around more, learning how to use his new abilities. As he moved around, he realized that he was not just a squirrel, lizard, snake hybrid thing. He was something else entirely. He also realized he was much bigger than what he would imagine one of those to be. In fact, he was bigger than most humans, if him seeing an actual squirrel is anything to go by. This is what Izuku looked like now. And for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, from the title, which is called What If Deku Was a Monster, I'm not just referring to any monster, I'm referring to a Tobikadachi from or a Tobaikadachi, whatever it's called, from Monster Hunter. And the reason why I decided on a Tobaikadachi, well, I figured that having One For All mixed with a monster from Monster Hunter would be an interesting sight to behold. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue the story. Izuku began to wander around more. He was hoping that he wasn't the only one that had been transported here, but even if he was, would his friends even recognize him? Would All Might recognize him? Would anybody recognize him? While he did still have very much traits that he had when he was a human, like the fact that his back legs were red, like his shoes, or the fact that he still had the diamond-shaped pattern on the backs of his head that resembled his freckles, he still was worried that he wouldn't be able to, be recognized by anybody. It wasn't long before Izuku heard a noise. It was the sound of a child crying. Izuku went towards the noise and saw a small toddler. He didn't know why there was a toddler out in the middle of the forest, but he knew that it wasn't safe for him to be here. His hero instincts kicked in, and he picked up the toddler, even though the toddler started screaming more at the fact that he thought he was going to be eaten, or, as much as a toddler can think. Izuku began to think, if there was a toddler around here, there has to be some humans, right? Humans that are probably looking for this toddler. So he began running through the trees, making sure the toddler did not get hit by any branches on the way, and began looking for any signs of humans being in the area. He eventually found a large group of humans, not knowing if they were hostile or not, considering the fact that they were all carrying weapons. He decided to try and sneak up on the humans because he didn't want them to freak out by him rushing towards them. So he learned how to sneak around, and he got behind them. But unfortunately, one of the humans noticed him, and right as he's about to put the toddler down, the human attempted to shoot him with what looked like a bow. Izuku then quickly put his tail in the way to block the arrows from hitting the child, and then put the child down and immediately ran away, realizing that humans probably hunted his kind for sport or something. Izuku eventually got away from the humans, but he made sure to actually go back and keep an eye on them. He then noticed something about the humans. They weren't just humans, they were his friends. His friends had been put here too, but they were humans still. He wasn't. They obviously didn't recognize him either. And he couldn't really do anything about it. As he began watching them, they eventually left the area, and him not really knowing what to do, he just kind of stayed in the area. He didn't want to go too close to wherever they came from because he was afraid that the other humans would see him and perceive him as a threat. So he just accepted his fate. He wasn't human anymore. He didn't have the same purpose he used to. I guess his new responsibility was to stay as this monster and survive. He began doing what he expected most monsters to do, but as he looked around, he noticed that other monsters weren't as intelligent as him. For the most part, they were all kind of, well, just animals, overly sized animals. One of the monsters that he constantly was getting into conflicts with was a wolf-looking creature with ice powers called a Lunagaron. Whatever these powers were, they weren't quirks, and they could activate them at any time, but didn't do it quite as often. Luckily for Izuku, because of the fact that he had one for all, he was still much faster than a regular Tobikadachi. He had also run into several other Tobikadachi as well, and they more or less ostracized him because of how different he was. It's not especially because, when primal instincts kick in and there's something off about one of your own kind, you're going to freak out about it. Izuku also realized that his new body did not allow him to fight the same way he used to with One for All, but he eventually figured out how to use the flaps between his skin to glide. He combining that with float allowed him to actually go longer distances, and because of his more stronger body now, he was actually able to use a more higher percentage of One for All than he was able to before. Using this, he basically dominated most of the other monsters in the area, even some of the stronger ones, such as the Zinogre. He also learned how to fling spikes from his tail, which was very useful. There were a few monsters that he wasn't able to beat. For instance, one of these monsters was a large, what looked like a mixture between a bat and a cougar creature. He didn't know what it was called, because while I am naming the creatures, he doesn't know what they're actually called. He just knows what they look like. And the creature also had spikes on his tail as well, and could fling them, but they weren't charged with electricity or nothing. All he knew was that this creature was constantly in a bad mood, so he tended to stay away from it. Izuku then decided to travel around more often than the area he was in. In case you're wondering, he started out in the ruins area from Monster Hunter Rise. And that's kind of where this story is taking place, is in the Monster Hunter Rise universe, or that part of the story. I don't know if each game is connected with one another or not. He found himself in an icy area. Looking around, he saw monsters that he hadn't seen before, and which kind of worried him, so he kept his distance to watch to see how they behaved. One of these monsters, which he actually was kind of a little bit horrified by, was the Kizu, a strange dragon-like creature with a worm-like head. It had no eyes, and its neck could stretch really long. He had seen this dragon, or whatever the heck this thing was, swallow smaller creatures whole, which disgusted him quite a bit. It was one of these days when he was walking that he noticed that Kizu was fighting a human, just a human on their own. It would have been he thought it would be smart for humans to be fighting together, like in a big group. Why are they fighting one of these monsters on their own? He then took a closer look at the human and realized who the human was. It was Todoroki. But he realized that the Kizu was actually losing. The key, due to Todoroki's fire side, the Kizu was backing off more often than actually fighting. He realized that maybe some of these monsters actually have weaknesses, and he wondered if he had a weakness. And he wanted to stay away. He didn't know what his weakness could be, and if these monsters all had different elemental weaknesses, then it's quite possible that he hasn't actually fought a monster that has the advantage over him yet. Izuku then noticed that Todoroki was using different weapons. He had seen hunters before, but he'd never seen a hunter use two different kinds of weapons. Usually the weapons they used were both from the same type, but Todoroki was using two different types. One of the weapons they were both small dagger-like weapons. One of the weapons appeared to be made from parts from an acnosm. Izuku then realized that that's why other monsters were hunted by humans, to make weapons and armor to protect the other hunters. He didn't want to know what weapons made out of whatever he was would look like. The other weapon he didn't recognize, but it looked as though it was made of more of plastic than anything else. But it looked like it had somewhat of patterns on it. Izuku then noticed another monster coming up behind Todoroki. This one looking like an overly sized rabbit. However, Todoroki was too late to realize that there was another monster behind him. But luckily for him, Izuku didn't. Todoroki was shocked to see the same exact Tobikadachi that had dropped the toddler at their feet earlier come and save his life. The Tobikadachi grabbed the rabbit and pretty much threw it around as though it was just a beach ball. Now, Todoroki had killed Tobikadachis before. He knew their weakness, ice. However, this Tobikadachi seemed to be a lot stronger than the ones he had fought. It was faster, stronger, more agile, and it seemed to be fighting with some form of made-up martial arts that it was using. The Tobikadachi had then killed the Lagambi, which is what the rabbit creature was called. Todoroki then realized that he was kind of backed into a corner now. With this overly strong Tobikadachi and this Kizu, he didn't know what to do. But then, to his shock, the Tobikadachi lunged at the Kizu and knocked it away briefly before it then looked at him and then ran away. Todoroki, not really knowing what was going on, realized that the Tobikadachi helped him for some reason. He didn't know why, but he also knew that Tobikadachi were not from around this area. They could be found in the ruins and even in the swampy areas, but they were never seen around here. He figured he might want to report this back to Kamura Village along with reporting it to his friends. Back to Izuku. Izuku had realized what his weaknesses while fighting that Lagambi. When the Lagambi threw a snowball at him, it hurt more than it should have. In his perspective, he realized that his weakness must be ice, which is unfortunate because he was in an ice area. That's not somewhere he wants to be. Izuku had decided to leave the snowy area. He didn't want to be getting any more weaker than he already was. He eventually came to a desert wasteland, not really knowing what to expect from here, but all he knew was that he needed to keep his eyes out. He noticed some dinosaur-looking creatures that looked similar to a Triceratops, but they weren't Triceratops at the same time. While he was traveling, he then realized something. When he fought that Lunagoron for the first time, he was lucky. That thing was ice. It could have killed him if it actually managed to touch him. And with how extremely aggressive and ferocious it was, he was lucky to even be alive after that. Luckily for Izuku, he had realized one thing. Ice-like monsters don't like heat, so he was pretty sure he was safe for now. But he did need to find some food, so he went looking for some smaller creatures to eat. It was a unfortunate acceptance that he had to eat smaller creatures to survive, but it was either them or him, and he was going to choose him every time. I mean them, not him. But Izuku, after eating, needed to figure out what kind of monsters lived around this area so that he could learn how to fight them too. If it was one thing he learned, that if he didn't keep an eye on the monsters, they would do something that he wouldn't expect. Regardless of if they were wild animals or not, they still had their own sneaky tricks that they could pull. It wasn't long before Izuku came across what looked like a T-Rex. It looked similar to a T-Rex with everything about it. It had the small arms. It had the obvious T-Rex looking body, but other than that, it was different somehow. The front of the snout was different than any T-Rex he'd seen in media. But then again, what what was he to know anything about a T-Rex, a creature that they've only seen the fossils and bones of? He noticed that there was also fur on the T-Rex, specifically on the shoulders, and somewhat on the tail. He then saw another T-Rex looking creature, but this one had more obvious differences, like the fact that it was seemingly blowing smoke out of the top of its head, and it had armor all along its back, all the way to its tail. It charged directly at the T-Rex and rammed into it. He realized that this must be a turf battle between two different monsters, or I guess dinosaurs. But then the more actual T-Rex looking one suddenly grew two spines out of its back and a fin on the top of its snout and breathed fire. Izuku then just stared as the two monsters began to fight each other, one of which was using mud as a weapon while the other was using fire. However, the one that looked more like a T-Rex was losing. It seemed that he was right on his guess, and that all the monsters had weaknesses of some kind, with fire being apparently weak to water, or any kind of liquid in general, because mud I guess counted as wet enough to be able to cancel out fire. But then again, sand also could do a number on fire, so he guessed that actually made sense. It wasn't long before the T-Rex looking monster was defeated, and Izuku thought of something. That the meat on the T-Rex looking one could feed him for quite a while. He just needed to get the body away from the armored looking T-Rex. Luckily for him, Izuku knew his elements, and he knew that any kind of liquid is subject to electricity. Without any hesitation, Izuku jumped on the back of the armored T-Rex and began to shoot out his electricity all over the T-Rex's body, frying it to a crisp. He then dragged the other T-Rex's body away to what he was now claiming as his den. Now, of course, there had been several monsters who had come in to try and take over his den from him, but he just fought them off. While he wasn't used to this new, hotter area, he had an advantage over quite a few of the monsters around here, due to the fact that he was smarter, faster, and a lot stronger than pretty much every other monster he's gone up against, except for the Nargacuga. He still hated that one. Luckily for him, he didn't have to deal with any for a while. He realized a little bit later into his excursions around the deserty wasteland that Nargacugas were not around the area at all. There was one monster in the area, though, that he would rather not eat. To him, it tasted terrible, and he would never eat it again as long as he lived. Although he probably should have expected it because I don't think anybody would want to eat a giant spider. But if there was one thing that he still kept, it was his intelligence. So while it was normal for monsters to eat their meat raw, Izuku never actually did. He always cooked his meat. Due to his electricity powers, he always found enough wood to start a fire, and he would cook whatever he was going to, eat before he ate it. Which, if any humans saw this, they would not know what's going on, but he hadn't come across any humans in a while. Todoroki was the last human he saw before moving to the sandy area, and he hadn't seen any humans in the area since. His favorite thing to eat, though, was still acnosm, because it was the closest thing that tasted anything like food back where he was from. The other ones all had their own unique taste, and some of them he thought were pretty good, but he still liked eating acnosm more than anything else due to the fact that it tasted like chicken, or close enough to chicken. He also didn't like eating raw geese. He didn't want to have to deal with taking the poisonous sacs out of the food before he ate it. Mostly because he didn't know how to do that. Izuku was willing to stay around here, though, because while it was rather hot, at least he was able to make a home here over making a home back in the ruins, or in the icy area for that matter. He didn't want to live in either one of those places. The ruins because it was very wet and damp in some areas, and there was always that grumpy Almudron to deal with whenever he got too close to the area it lived in. In this area, though, he was pretty much the ruler of the sandy area. Even if it was hot, his den was nice and shady. Meanwhile, back in Kimura Village, Todoroki was telling the rest of Class 1A how he was saved by the same Tobigidachi that had brought that toddler to them, and then it just ran away. He hadn't seen it since, but he knew that it was somehow still out there. Ida and Uraraka brought up the fact that they had been talking about the mannerisms that it showed last time, and what from Todoroki told him how it had just saved him and then left. as though it knew it could take care of the other monster on his own. They also took into consideration the fact that they brought a child to them. The child was not hurt in the slightest, and then just left. They had fought several Tobi-Kadachi before. All of them had. They found them annoying. But this one seemed different, more intelligent than the other Tobi-Kadachi. They knew something was up, but they also had other things to be concerned about, like the fact that nobody knew what happened to Midoriya. He had mysteriously vanished. He hadn't been in the same place with the rest of them. Everyone else had woken up in Kimura Village, but Izuku was missing. Everybody else was here. All Might, Aizawa, even the principal. Everybody else was here. But Izuku wasn't. He'd mysteriously vanished. Nobody knew what happened to him. So they were still looking for him. And now they had this mysterious Tobi-Kadachi to worry about. A Tobi-Kadachi that seemed more intelligent than the others. They were actually lucky enough to be taught the basics by one of the local hunters from the village, a hunter named Torch. She had saved Kimura more than once, and even gone off out of the country to go and help another country out. The odd part about her, though, was her strange appearance. Unlike the other hunters, she had a more colorful appearance. Her hair being a very deep blue, and having two strands of it stick up, and that look somewhat like fox ears. She wore her own custom-made purple and orange armor, and even had what looked to be a fake foxtail attached to her waist or nearby her tailbone. She wasn't very talkative, but she was very intelligent and very skilled with a bow. Whenever one of them had ventured out with her, she either used a bow gun, dual blades, or a charge blade. Like all the other hunters, she had a palamute and a palico. She had two palicos, actually. One which was black and white and looked similar to a tuxedo cat, and another that looked more like a chocolate point ragdoll. Her dog, however, was a bright green, black, and blue, having very odd colors added to its fur. While most of Class 1A had their own pets, some of them chose to not have a palico or a palamute. One of these was Ida, who he didn't see the necessities to have a dog to carry him through the field when he was already faster than most of them anyway. He did have two cats, however, who most of the time just stood on his shoulders. Uraraka had two dogs, which she had named Saturn and Jupiter due to their colors. Todoroki did not have any pets, due to the fact that he figured that if he had any and they were in battle with him, they could possibly be hurt by some of his ice or fire attacks. Uraraka and Ida had decided to take a quest to the desert wastelands. They felt that that they needed to do more work, and some of the monsters they'd been taking down were rather easy, and they were all in the ruins too. In fact, most of the stronger monsters had mysteriously been, well, either killed or had just vanished. The only strong monster that was still around was the grumpy Almudron that lived up in the higher areas of the ruins, which nobody dared to fight because he was mean. They had decided to hunt a Puki, which happened to be around the desert area. There weren't very many of them in the desert area, but there was some. When they got to the desert area, they began to look around. There were quite a few monsters, but for the most part, they were kind of weak. They had fought several of them and had taken them down, and some of them seemed like kind of afraid of something. They then came across a den. As they walked in, they were expecting some kind of big and scary monster to be living there, only to pause in confusion and a little bit of awe as they saw the Tobi-Kadachi that they had been talking about previously, putting up what looked like a fence around the den, like the bigger part of the den. It was using a rock to pound big wooden stakes into the ground and putting up walls as though it was trying to keep something out, or maybe keep something in. They pretty much had confirmed at this point that this Tobi-Kadachi was not normal. It was smarter than the others, and apparently knew how to use tools. Even though it didn't have the ability to use thumbs, it still was using a rock to make a fence somehow. They looked over in the corner and noticed that there was a couch. The couch was made of several bones that had been very much smashed and crushed together into a very crude shape of a couch, and was covered by cushions and fabric made of what looked like Lagombi and Azuros fur. However, it was then they noticed that there were a few Jaggi sneaking up on them. They both turned around to intercept, but however, once they were about to attack, the Tobikidachi was suddenly there, attacking the small dinosaur-like creatures and killing them all instantly before dragging them over to where what looked like a campfire was set. It put the bodies of the Jaggi next to it before it then actually noticed the two humans in its den. It stared at them for a bit and then went back to doing what it was doing. Ida and Uraraka were both bewildered and confused at the behavior of this monster. It was way more intelligent than it should be. Not only that, it was smart enough to know how to build furniture and apparently make campfires. They decided to leave the strange Tobikidachi alone and go look for the creature they were actually supposed to be hunting down. After taking down the Puki, they decided to go back and see if the Tobikidachi was still in the den. They noticed that the fence had actually been finished being put up, with the front of the den being covered by what looked to be a door made entirely of rocks. They clearly couldn't get in that way, so they decided to go through the large crack in the roof they had seen from the inside the den. They went in to look down and just stared as they saw the Tobikidachi cooking the Jaggi it had killed earlier over the fire, as though they were like, you know, a pig stuck through with the spear and like just spinning them around the flame. They stared in both confusion and shock and a little bit of amusement as the creature apparently knew how to cook as well. They decided to go back to Kimura Village, report that they had killed the Puki, and report their information that they had discovered about the Tobikidachi. Unfortunately, many did not believe what they had told them about the mysterious Tobikidachi, but Class 1A were curious. And so, the next day, they had all decided to go to the desert area to watch the Tobikidachi themselves. All of Class 1A and those who had been in UA watched as the Tobikidachi went through its daily routine. It had gone out and fought several large and small monsters, beating them with little to no effort. With its strange, overpowered strength, and it would just go back and do things that you would normally see a human doing, not a monster. It would cook, it would build, it would just do whatever whatever you would imagine a human would do in its daily routine. It had even done a few drawings. One of these drawings, however, caught the attention of all of them. A drawing that looked very similar to what looked to be All Might's muscle form, although it was very crudely drawn, considering it was using its claw to do all of it. Class 1A then began to wonder if this Tobikidachi had been watching them, and had been learning from them, because this was rather odd for a Tobikidachi to be acting this way. And even though its drawing was somewhat crude, it was still very good for being a monster. They decided to take pictures and then show them to Kimura Village. When the village found out about this very intelligent Tobikidachi, they had decided on something. Maybe they could communicate with this Tobikidachi. Maybe they could get it to help them in their efforts to get rid of all the other monsters, except for other Tobikidachi, because they didn't know if it would be against that or not. However, when they went back to the den, the Tobikidachi and everything in the cave that it had were gone. However, they noticed what looked to be cart trails in the sand that were leading away from the desert area. They followed the cart trails, but when the cart trails ended after the dirt ended, they didn't know where it could have gone. They gave up on their search for now, but they knew that the creature had moved somewhere between the ruins and the volcanic area. Back with Izuku had trained up enough to learn how to deal with the Almudron if it ever came to it again. He had moved back to the ruins because he was kind of tired of the heat. He wanted a nice cool weather, but also not cold, so he went back to the ruins. His new den was on top of a mountain peak that was in the middle of the ruins area. It wasn't very hidden, but it was good enough, and it would take some humans a while to get up to where he was at. The reason he had left in the first place was because he was afraid that the humans would attempt to take him down or capture him for study, and he didn't want that. Even if they were his friends, they didn't know who he was, and even if he showed that he was unwilling to attack them, he still worried for his own safety. It was late at night, though, when he was sleeping, and he heard a commotion at nearby the bottom of the mountain. He woke up and went to look over the edge and noticed a Magnamalo. He had seen this Magnamalo before, and it had caused trouble on more than one occasion, but he chose to leave it alone. The Magnamalo was fighting several humans, 4 of them to be exact. He looked closer and noticed that all 4 humans were people from UA with him: Todoroki, Bakugo, Uraraka, and Ida. All of them were kind of struggling, though. He knew that the Magnamalo was tough. He had fought it before and had actually tied with it. With how absurdly strong it was, he had actually earned the Magnamalo's respect, and it left him alone for the most part. However, he was not willing to let his friends die, even if they didn't know who he was. Without any hesitation, Izuku ran down the mountain, charging up one for all. He put his claws together and sort of, well, let me show you. Ouch! He put his claws in kind of like this. Because he can't really do a finger flick anymore, so he has to do that to do a Delaware Smash. And as he charged it up, all 4 classmates heard the familiar charging up sound that was one for all, and assumed that All Might was coming to help, because All Might actually has one for all back now. They were surprised to see the Tobikadachi from the intelligent Tobikadachi come and shoot what looked to be a Delaware Smash directly at the Magnamalo, not sending it flying back a few yards. The Magnamalo roared at the Tobikadachi, which roared back before they started fighting. It was then that the members of Class 1A noticed a very familiar movements coming from the Tobikadachi. It was jumping off from tree to tree, and with a blur of electricity following it the entire time, punching the Magnamalo in with its claws curled in to try and make somewhat of a fist. It also would whip it every now and then with its tail. But the dead giveaway as to who this Tobikadachi actually was when the Tobikadachi thrust both of its front legs forward and black tendrils shot out of its claws, wrapping the Magnamalo up, before it then stabbed the Magnamalo through the chest with its tail. They had known that this Tobikadachi was much stronger than most Tobikadachi were, but they had no idea it was capable of taking down a Magnamalo. But there was something else that all of them recognized in it. As they looked into the eyes of the Tobikadachi, even if it wasn't looking back at them, they noticed the determination and the same determination in the eyes that Deku always had. It was Bakugo who spoke first. Deku. The Tobikadachi looked towards the 3 hunters. At first, in confusion and somewhat hope, before it then realized that maybe he heard different. It began to climb back up the mountain before Uraraka then called out with the same nickname. The Tobikadachi then turned around, realizing that he actually did hear right, and walked slowly over to Uraraka. Uraraka realized that it wasn't because Deku did die like the rest of them and was put into this new world, but he wasn't turned into he didn't stay a human like the others did. He had been transformed into a monster. And he still had one for all, and his intelligence. That's why the Tobikadachi was so intelligent. The entire time that they had been watching this Tobikadachi, and every time they'd come in contact with it, it had always been Izuku the entire time. Ida attempted to ask the Tobikadachi, or attempted to ask Deku, why he didn't try to communicate with them, why he never tried to reunite with them. The Deku just shook his head and thought before putting a claw down to the ground and writing in the dirt that I never had any chance to explain, because the first time we came in contact with one another, you attacked me. Uraraka and Ida, along with the other 2, had decided that they could finally bring Izuku back home with them, or back to their new home. When the 4 arrived, while with a large Tobikadachi with an odd color pattern following behind them, needless to say, that Kamura village was panicking at first, But then they told them what had happened and how it turns out that the Tobi-Kadachi they'd been watching wasn't an actual Tobi-Kadachi, but was their friend who had been reincarnated into one. It was then that Koda walked up to Izuku and attempted to communicate with him because remember, he can speak to animals, and that's technically what Izuku is right now. Luckily for him, they could talk. Izuku could finally have a conversation with somebody without having to write something in the dirt, even though that was his first time doing it. Right off the bat, several members of Kamura Village attempted to build what looked like a cage for Izuku, but several of Class 1A and some of Class 1B had said that they should just build a house for him, since he is technically still a human, just trapped in the body of a monster. It took some convincing, but eventually they had all decided to build an entire house for Izuku, with Izuku actually helping by using rocks as makeshift hammers, as well as using his jaw as a makeshift wrench. Over time, Kamura Village got used to the intelligent Tobi-Kadachi, or Izuku as they all called him, living in their village, and he even went out on patrols with them, and even got his own set of custom-made armor that was designed to resist ice, so that he didn't have that weakness anymore. After a while, they had pretty much fallen into what is the new norm for Kamura Village, with Izuku going out on quests with Ida and Uraraka acting as a mount for Uraraka and her two dogs, as well as him helping them take out monsters much easier than they were able to before, making life for Kamura Village much easier than it was. It wasn't until they had received a mission to take down an Elder Dragon, and not just any Elder Dragon, a Crimson Valstrax. Izuku had never actually come in contact with a Crimson Valstrax, but he had seen them from far away, flying through the air. He knew they were fast. He was fast too, not as fast as a Crimson Valstrax was, but he was fast enough to be able to help when they needed to. But they decided to have the whole of Class 1A and some of Class 1B help out with taking this thing down, because as an Elder Dragon, these things are strong. But that's where we're going to leave the story for now. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. I will see you for the next one. Goodbye.